What happens when two of the most outspoken personalities in entertainment sit across from each other and the conversation takes a turn nobody expected? What happens when decades of built-up tension, professional rivalry, and personal grudges explode on live television in front of millions of viewers? Today, we're breaking down the explosive exchange that led to Joy Behar walking off The View for good. And trust me, you need to hear every single word of what went down. But before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about this whole situation, because this is one for the history books. The atmosphere in the studio that morning was deceptively standard. Those seasoned observers noticed an unusual charge in the air. Robert De Niro sat across from the panel, ostensibly to promote a film, but the pleasantries evaporated almost instantly. Joy Behar, known for her sharp tongue and refusal to stick to a script, bypassed the promotional fluff. She pivoted the conversation toward De Niro's recent public statements on Hollywood elitism, accusing him of being part of the very bubble he claimed to understand. De Niro, never one to back down from a confrontation, tightened his jaw. He didn't just defend his position. He challenged Behar's own connection to the average American, suggesting her truth was filtered through a lens of fame and isolation. The tension escalated when Behar dismissed De Niro's acting career as playing pretend for a paycheck, suggesting it gave him no moral authority to speak on social issues. This was the spark that turned a debate into a personal war. De Niro leaned in, his voice dropping to that signature gravelly intensity, and accused Behar of living in an echo chamber, where she only engaged with people who validated her worldview. He questioned if she had any self-awareness at all, or if she simply shouted into a void for the sake of ratings. The audience sat in a stunned, collective silence as the two veterans of the industry stripped away the professional veneers they had worn for years. It wasn't just a disagreement about politics or lifestyle. It was a fundamental clash of egos, with the other co-hosts like Whoopi Goldberg and Sunny Hostin looking on in visible distress, unable to bridge the widening chasm between their colleague and their guest. Robert De Niro's accusation that Joy was projecting her frustrations acted as the final straw in an already crumbling dialogue. As he stood up to meet her energy, the physical space between them seemed to shrink, creating a confrontation rarely seen in daytime television. He pointed out the irony of her position, claiming that she built a career on being controversial but couldn't handle it. When someone finally matched her vitriol, the word tantrum was thrown into the mix, a label that clearly incensed Behar. She viewed her stance as a righteous defense against a pompous, self-righteous actor, while he saw it as a public meltdown triggered by a bruised ego. The producers in the control room were reportedly in a state of total panic. While the show thrives on hot topics and spirited debate, this had transcended the boundaries of entertainment. Whoopi Goldberg's repeated attempts to call for a commercial break were ignored by Behar, who seemed determined to finish the fight on her own terms. Joy turned her ire toward her own colleagues, specifically Sarah Haynes, snapping at her to stay out of it, with a level of venom that left the table speechless. This internal fracture was perhaps the most shocking part of the segment. It wasn't just a guest versus a host anymore, but a host turning against her own team. Behar felt abandoned, believing that the other women should have formed a united front against De Niro's aggressive psychoanalysis. When Behar finally began unmasking her microphone, the sound of it hitting the table echoed like a gavel. She looked directly into the camera, her face flushed with a mixture of betrayal and exhaustion, and announced that she refused to be made a fool of or gaslit on her own platform. Her exit was not a theatrical storm-off. It was a cold, deliberate walk toward the wings of the stage. De Niro stood there, momentarily stunned by the finality of her action. He hadn't expected his pushback to result in a resignation. As the studio doors swung shut behind her, the silence that followed was heavier than the shouting that preceded it. The show was left with an empty chair that felt like a gaping wound in the production's identity. The moments following Joy's departure were some of the most uncomfortable in the history of live broadcasting. Whoopi Goldberg, left to pick up the pieces, turned her frustration toward De Niro, asking if he was satisfied with the outcome. The legendary actor appeared shaken, his earlier combativeness replaced by a somber realization of the consequences. He attempted to justify his actions by stating he was merely defending himself against an ambush. But the panel wasn't buying it. Sunny Hostin pointed out that De Niro had systematically dismantled Behar's character on air, leaving her with little choice but to leave if she wanted to retain any shred of her professional dignity. Off camera, the chaos continued. Reports from behind the scenes suggested that Behar did not stop at her dressing room, but headed straight for the exit of the building. The remaining hosts were forced to go to an emergency commercial break to decide how to handle the final segments of the show. During that hiatus, the conversation between Whoopi and De Niro remained tense. Whoopi explained that while Joy could be stubborn, her passion was genuine, and De Niro's personal attacks had crossed a line that transformed a debate into a character assassination. De Niro, for his part, maintained that he came in good faith, but was met with a level of hostility he couldn't ignore. When the cameras finally cut back to the studio, the energy was somber. The usual upbeat theme music felt jarringly out of place. Whoopi addressed the audience with a transparency that is rare for the network, admitting that emotions had boiled over and that the situation was raw and real. She didn't try to sugarcoat the event or pretend it was a scripted stunt. The hosts acknowledged their love for Joy, but also their commitment to finishing the broadcast. However, the chemistry was gone. Every time the camera panned across the table, the empty seat where Behar usually sat served as a silent testament to the bridge that had been burned. The view was still standing, but its foundation had been severely rattled. In the aftermath of the broadcast, the industry was abuzz with speculation about whether this was truly the end for Joy Behar. While she had taken breaks before, the finality of her words and the public nature of the fallout suggested a permanent rift. The three remaining hosts sat together after the final sign-off, reflecting on the day's events in the quiet, emptied studio. Whoopi held Joy's abandoned microphone, contemplating the difficulty of moving forward. They discussed the reality of their jobs, how a show built on the exchange of ideas could so easily become a weapon that destroys the people involved. Public reaction was polarized. Some viewers praised De Niro for finally holding Behar accountable for her perceived elitism, while others were horrified by his treatment of a legendary broadcaster on her own set. The debate moved from the TV screen to social media, where clips of the exchange went viral, garnering millions of views within hours. The incident sparked a larger conversation about the state of civil discourse in America. If two professionals with decades of experience couldn't sit at a table for 20 minutes without a total collapse, what hope was there for the rest of the country? The echo chamber comment, in particular, resonated with many who felt that daytime talk shows had become too one-sided. As for Robert De Niro, the win he was accused of seeking felt hollow. He left the studio without the usual fanfare, avoiding the press waiting outside. The fallout from the exchange likely tarnished the promotional tour for his project, as every interview following that day focused on the Behar meltdown. Back at the studio, the producers were already facing the logistical nightmare of a post-Behar era. Whether she returns or not, the explosive exchange changed the DNA of the show. It served as a reminder that behind the bright lights and makeup, these are real people with real breaking points. The story of Joy Behar's walk-off remains a landmark moment in television history, leaving fans to wonder if the table will ever truly be the same again.